Chapter 161, Seal of Lands, Part 4. Lu Shu carried 17 spears on his shoulder as he sized up the 12 terracotta soldiers. Truth to be told, he sensed huge waves of energy from his opponents, and it seemed like these stone soldiers possessed power similar to Zhao Haiping, the pinnacle of Class C. If it was like that, with 12 of these terracotta soldiers at the peak of Class C standing guard here, even Li Xiao might not be able to get the upper hand if he came here personally. Previously, when Li Xiao was up against 13 Class C, highly skilled Indians, he required the help of 2 Class Cs of the Heavenly Network for him to finish the job. Even so, the 2 members of the Heavenly Network sacrificed their lives in the process. If Li Xiao was to face these 12, he would have much trouble. Perhaps, he might not even be able to beat them. It wasn't that Lu Shu was exceptionally powerful. It was just that his celestial map was too strange. The corpse dog from the first nebula was the embodiment of one of the 7 souls of instinct, joy. It could kill souls in a split second. If it was another remains, Lu Shu would definitely not have such a big advantage. But it was just that empty Beimang's remains were filled with souls and ghosts. Thinking about it now, Lu Shu was rather regretful that he didn't find out about this special ability of the corpse dog earlier. Or else he would have swept all the skeletons with his corpse dog. Then, he would have much more gold chains, watches, and etc. in his possession. Lu Shu dared not drag for long as he was worried the remains would dissipate after Li Xiao managed to obtain the relic, which was the spear. It was clear that these terracotta soldiers were protecting something in the main hall. He would regret it if he did not see what was in there. What exactly were these 12 terracotta soldiers guarding? Lu Shu walked towards the main hall, and with his corpse dog in his hand, the terracotta soldiers stood motionless just like real terracotta figures, just that they were missing something in their hands. From the terracotta soldiers' distress, +1+1+1. It seemed like the spears here were of a higher level than those stolen from the skeletons previously. They didn't seem normal, and Lu Shu tried aiming his celestial energy at one of them, and soft screeches actually emitted from the spear. Good stuff. But the Heavenly Network would never allow him to keep one of these items. But now that Li Xiao and he were strategic business partners, could he make an exception? It would probably be good to have one of these. Furthermore, no one knew where and when the first black market would pop up. Lu Shu was actually very confident and optimistic towards the emergence of a black market. No matter how strict the Heavenly Network's regulation was, China is a big country and there would definitely be some gray areas. Lu Shu walked over the plaque inscribed Strategic Castle and went into the main hall, only to find out that it was completely empty apart from a table. And on the table were some ink and paper. Lu Shu was utterly disappointed by this sight. Shouldn't there be some glowing object or something of that sort? He walked ahead to see if there were any other mysterious secrets within this main hall. At the moment, the ghost general Li Xiao was battling suddenly increased the tempo of the battle. With a fling of his wrist, 9 black dragons emerged from the spear, roaring towards Li Xiao. Li Xiao was in huge shock. His opponent actually used a killer move, sending out 9 black dragons. He only had a fierce tiger. At the moment when the ghost general thought Li Xiao would loosen his grip, Li Xiao grabbed onto the spear with one hand while his other hand gripped his head and braced himself for impact. The ghost general was confused. Is he still refusing to let go? He then noticed a problem. This fatty was quite resistant to attacks. In reality, those who went against Li Xiao all knew that in terms of offense, he was just an average practitioner within Class B. After all, who in Class B didn't have 1 or 2 special attacks up their arsenal? But what they were annoyed at was although this fatty couldn't do a huge amount of damage, he was extremely damage resistant. Whatever method used, it wouldn't be very effective on his body. It was as if the power and might of any move would be reduced on attacking him. The 9 dragons attacked Li Xiao's body relentlessly, and although Li Xiao was crying out, he did not have the slightest intention of loosening his grip on the spear. The ghost general was speechless. How greedy was this guy? Is he not willing to give up something good? Just what exactly are you? The ghost general already sensed that someone had gone past the 12 terracotta soldiers and barged into the main hall. He couldn't care about Li Yixiao's constant pestering anymore. He immediately released the spear and turned towards the direction of the main hall. He couldn't understand it at all. The 12 terracotta soldiers were extremely powerful, how could anyone go past them? And wasn't the only person who could barge being held back by him? Li Yixiao was rather confused as he took control of the spear. Why did the other party release his grip? But shouldn't the remains disappear now that he had obtained the relic? Why was it not disappearing? No, this is not the relic. Li Yixiao's expression turned pale from shock. The experiences from the heavenly network weren't too relevant anymore. But it wasn't surprising, considering that the number of remains they had experienced was too little. Nie Ting had warned him that the relic would recognize a new owner and enter his body, and with that, the remains would dissipate. Now, Li Yixiao realized that he could have made a mistake and that this spear in his hand wasn't the relic. Chase. Li Yixiao wanted to know what was it that caused this ghost general to give up on this spear. As he approached the main hall, he looked at the terracotta soldiers. Where are your weapons? The terracotta soldiers stood motionless while Lu Shu's distress point income increased rapidly. It was at this moment when Li Yixiao got there and the ghost general couldn't care less, flailing his huge arm, kill him. The eyes of the terracotta soldiers turned red and he felt that these soldiers looked extremely temperamental. He estimated their abilities, and turned to run immediately. Damn, Nie Ting had told him that the remains activated in conjunction with the increase in magical energy in the world. Although they had yet to reach Class A, any monster within the remain would not be much better than them. After all, the elapsed time had been so short. But the problem was that the opposition had strength in numbers. The ghost general did not bother about Li Yixiao and darted into the main hall. As he entered the main hall, he saw Lu Shu opening a yellow dragon box on the table, holding up a small seal inside. The moment Lu Shu made contact with the seal, it disintegrated into a beam of light which entered Lu Shu's body, rendering him confused at that moment. The ghost general was absolutely furious at this sight. How dare you steal my seal of lands? Lu Shu was rather confused. What's wrong, is this seal so important? Weren't you with Fatty Li? Why are you so agitated? Speaking of which, where's your spear? At this moment, everything within the remains started to disappear into dust. He was suddenly shocked. Did he just obtain the relic? Chapter 162, Survivors, Part 1. Everything within the realm of the remains froze from this moment on. The ghosts which were dashing towards Lu Shu were frozen midair, and Li Yixiao also froze in his position in the middle of an escape. The red eyes of the terracotta soldiers glowed with anger, as if yearning to release all their rage. The fights between the armored soldiers and the heavenly network within the underground palace also froze. It was as if someone pressed the pause button on this world. It was extremely strange and everyone could feel themselves passing through space and time, just like when they got here. Lu Shu's squirrel was quite terrified as it had never experienced any of this. As Lu Shu was also being transported out of the remains, its small paws were grabbing tightly onto a lump of Lu Shu's hair. This realm of the remains was broken and everything started to disappear. Lu Shu felt that something was wrong. It wasn't disappearing, but congregating towards that yellow dragon seal within his body. This time he also realized he was the only one who could move in this entire world. For some reason, he felt that there was some space within this seal. Just at the last instant, when the remains were disappearing, Lu Shu tried keeping the 12 spears he got from the terracotta within the seal. With his mind, he could still retrieve these spears anytime. There was no more time. And at the next instant, the world changed. The weird sighting on MT Beimang was no longer just an event lasting a couple of days. The thick fog enveloping MT Beimang could be viewed by everyone from Luochang who was on high ground. It was like a huge dreamland over there. Although everyone kept mentioning the increase in magical energy, no one actually saw it physically before. No one expected to actually see such a weird sighting within their lifetime. This gigantic weird sighting was the best example to substantiate the increasing magical energy in the world. The bottom of the mountain was already cordoned off by some defense teams, and teams were still relentlessly flowing over. Even common citizens wanted to go over to look, but they could not get near. At this moment, many parents, from Luocheng and elsewhere, were gathered here. Previously, when Daoyuan class assembled all of their students from Yuzhou here, their parents had questioned the school when their children did not return for a long time. Only then did they know of such an event. So more and more worried parents arrived, afraid that something unprecedented would happen to their child. They didn't think there'd be problems initially, but as time dragged on, their optimism in their hearts started to fade. Because of these parents, all of Luocheng's hotels were bustling. The parents waited here in the morning and left in dejection at night. Incidents of parents squabbling with those securing the area didn't happen just once, or twice, as their feelings increasingly got the better of them. Everyone knew of Luocheng's ancient remains through the Golden Foundation's website. The information on the previous remains was not released back then, as it was merely the beginning of the magical era, and people had not gotten used to the change in the world. Now that everyone had slowly accepted all these events, they could release information regarding the ancient remains. Everyone was paying attention to the incidents at Luocheng's ancient remains. Many people went to the Golden Foundation's website daily to see the state of the ancient remains, if it was still there. More and more information on the remains were leaked out, and even the term relic was common information. Information on the huge battle at Laos at the start of the year was also leaked, and the thought of experts from tens of countries battling for a relic was indeed jaw-dropping. This was such a glorious era. But some people also realized that since Luocheng's remains opened, it wasn't as chaotic as what happened in Laos. What happened? Did everyone suddenly become courteous and gentlemanly? And those experts who had the notion of invading the remains this time all had their own opinions and kept their silence. On that night, parents were just leaving when suddenly someone shouted, "The huge fog is fading. The huge fog is fading." Everyone turned around immediately. The huge fog was indeed fading rapidly, and all of the parents turned back towards the mountain frantically. Those who could get a cab got a cab, while the rest counted on their legs. They had not seen their children for too many days, and it was hard for bystanders to understand this feeling the parents had for their children. At this moment, in the military base on the peak of Mt. Baimang, everyone had returned to this world, including those who died during this foray into the remains. Everyone was at the military base in the position where they were running away from the fog initially. Next to Lu Shu was Jiang Shuyi, and beside Jiang Shuyi were the other Daoyuan students from Luocheng. At this moment, everyone saw this familiar sight and the familiar students beside themselves in tattered clothes and dirty faces. A sort of relief started to form in their hearts. It was like a movie, where everyone had been left at the sea for who knows how many days without anything to eat or drink. But one day, they finally saw land after days of being stuck. That land represented a new life. Some people suddenly sat down wailing. Some people had the will to console their classmates, but as they consoled, they themselves started weeping as well. While some others sat on the floor and started cheering, they had finally gotten salvation. Cheers and cries echoed from the military base, and Lu Shu and Jiang Shui exchanged glances. Neither of them said anything. In truth, they were better off compared to the rest, as they did not suffer much inside. Lu Shu suddenly saw a familiar figure, Lu Li. He was still in a state of shock, holding onto 2 green fruits and squatting on the floor with a bruised and swollen face. It seemed like he was pelted with rocks by the squirrels. Lu Shu felt strange. He didn't expect Lu Li to survive, but seeing a familiar face alive, no matter their relations, Lu Shu felt good. Under this tense atmosphere, full of wailing, Lu Shu looked at his surroundings. In the sea of cries, Lu Shu carried his 5 spears and stood upright, all of his watches and gold chains standing out. Apart from his outfit, his complexion stood out from the rest. This sort of feeling was like doing a multiple-choice question. From the answers below, choose one which stands out. Yup, this was a giveaway. But the surrounding students did not have the capacity to notice Lu Shu anymore. Everything started settling in after expressing their emotions. They did not know what to do and did not know what to say. This was the real reaction they should have after surviving this ordeal. Chapter 163, The Overall Picture, Part 2. In an alley in the capital, the door to a small courtyard opened, revealing a canopy of a century-old walnut tree. During the early spring, it was still chilly in the capital as Nie Ting, donned in a black cloak and in deep thought, sat opposite Shi Xuejin. And Shi Xuejin was busy like a normal person. 4 plates of snacks were placed on the stone table between them, and under the table was a small stove, warming a pot of wine. Shi Xuejin checked the time and added ginger and plums into the pot and closed the lid once again, before shaking off the ginger froth on his hands. He looked up at Nie Ting. It's a pity that we didn't obtain the relic this time. Li Yixiao suspects that the spy took advantage of the ghosts not attacking him to obtain the relic. But this still requires confirmation. Shi Xuejin finished his sentence and saw that Nie Ting didn't voice out any opinions and continued, we can tell the danger of spies from this incident and must take extreme measures against them, or else things would only turn for the worse. All the experts at the border had taken action but did not find any trace of the spy. The long spear that Li Yixiao obtained had been checked and it isn't the relic. We have no idea what the real relic is. Li Yixiao said that he heard the ghost general say, how dare you steal my seal of lands. Nie Ting heard the 3 words seal of lands and suddenly opened his eyes. Shi Xuejin smiled, yes, you know about the mountain river seal too. Although we don't know how much power this ancient item still possesses, it has fallen into the hands of the spy. This is really frustrating. What if it could be activated? Li Yixiao is really unreliable. At this point in time, the only knowledge the Heavenly Network had about the relic was its name. After exiting the remains, Li Yixiao started his report on the whole process, and Shi Xuejin found out that Li Yixiao didn't even know who took the relic. He was too caught up with evading the attacks of the terracotta soldiers to notice what was happening in the main hall. Nie Ting calmly said, the seal of lands can tap into the magical energy of the world, and this is a characteristic we both know. Send 2 experts that are receptive to magical energy over to Luocheng to wait for orders. Let's see if this spy would slip up. But we shouldn't have too high hopes. Compared to the whole situation, a seal of lands is insignificant, and this incident would just be a small mishap in our entire plan. Shi Xuejin sighed, but that's still a seal of lands. But from Nie Ting's perspective, no matter how powerful a single treasure was, an overall victory was still the priority. From today onwards, the appearance of subsequent remains inside the country would apply a greater pressure on them. It was like monopolizing a piece of cake and not letting anyone else have a bite. Although Li Yixiao lost the relic, he managed to kill all the Indian practitioners, and even the Japanese had only 1 surviving spy. As for the Indians, out of the only 13 known class CS, 11 had died this time. Practitioners weren't an unlimited resource, and India had tried their luck by sending people here. But they were all lost, and India wouldn't be acting so presumptuous in the future. And this incident was a message to the rest of the experts in the world by using the Indians as an example. As Nie Ting said, compared to the bigger picture, a mere seal of lands was insignificant. This didn't mean that the seal of lands wasn't important, if not he wouldn't have bothered sending those experts to Luocheng. Shi Xuejin nodded and didn't say anything else. He flipped through the report details from Zhong Yutong, and there was a small part talking about how unreliable Li Yixiao was. Flipping to the end, Shi Xuejin suddenly looked up. The number of student casualties is still being compiled, and I'm afraid it isn't a small number. What should we do? In between words, he poured Nie Ting a cup of the warm wine and used a bamboo chopstick to pick out the plums into his own plate. He had a liking for these things. Those who wish to quit can do so, and we will provide compensation. There will be an uproar, but it will die down eventually. We can't back down now, but we should lay low for a while. There will be many criticisms against the Heavenly Network. Nye Ting finished the yellow wine in a gulp. The people thought that training was a smooth sailing process, but now they all want out. They don't know that the road of training had always been filled with deaths. It was like this when magical energy was scarce, and nothing changed after the recovery of magical energy. Those afraid of death shouldn't take part in this. I think that the Daoyuan class teacher-student system should be changed. The performance this time is too disappointing. I think we're being too lenient. Sure, Xuejin placed the plums inside his mouth and said, the compensation is going to strain our budget. At the empty Beimang camp, before the students left, the Heavenly Network notified them to cooperate with a headcount first. Lu Shu acted natural and assured himself that no one knew he obtained the relic. After all, only the Ghost General had witnessed it. The Seal of Lands was suspended motionless in midair inside his vision, and within the space inside the Seal of Lands, there were 12 long spears that Lu Shu took from the terracotta soldiers. Frankly speaking, under the circumstance that Lu Shu didn't know the powers of the Seal of Lands, the convenient storage space that it provided was what he fancied the most. The 5 spears that Lu Shu brought out were collected by Zhong Yutong, and so did the rest of the people's weapons, which they obtained in the remains. But Zhong Yutong also took down their names and the number of weapons they obtained for future reference when it came to rewards. Lu Shu wasn't displeased at all. Thinking that he had secretly hidden 12s of the best long spears, he felt a sense of satisfaction. Although he couldn't casually take these long spears out, spear throwing was one of his unique techniques, and having these 12 long spears was a huge boost to his killing abilities. Lu Shu estimated that he could easily throw a spear 1 kilometer, but a long distance would affect his accuracy. The distance of throw which he could retain precision would be about 300 m. This was already very powerful. The numbers were compiled and the number of Daoyuan students' casualties was 311. This was considered a major incident. It was predicted that the parents wouldn't be let this matter go easily. The first conflict between society regulations and the Heavenly Network was going to be incurred by this incident. But how the parents were going to react did not concern Lu Shu. He was still alive after all. Lu Shu looked back at the peak of the mountain and saw Li Xiao holding onto the long spear and standing at attention atop the mountain, with a disappointed expression. It was at this moment when Lu Shu suddenly thought of checking his distress points records. Logically, him obtaining the relic should have incurred a lot of distress. Chapter 164, More kissing and things will get out of control. The boyfriend was truly troublesome. It wasn't as if they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Although there was filming every day, when they both got home, they still had time to be with each other. Speaking of which, he hadn't even the score with Fu Sikhen for the princess hug. It was high time to teach the boyfriend who was the top party and who was the bottom party. But that was just what Pei Zhen thought. His action betrayed him as he punched out the details of the night's social event on his mobile and sent them to Fu Sikhen. In the entertainment circle, there was never a lack of social events. Although Pei Zhen was lazy, he was street smart and knew he had to play his part. He was quick to get into character when acting and had good technical skills. Hence, even though he had more scenes to cover, he completed them ahead of the other actors. As the best actor candidate, he had to do the necessary niceties to secure his own future. Hence, he hosted the banquet. Xiao Nian had booked a private function room at the hotel restaurant earlier on. The group of them drank a lot and ate very little, inevitably getting themselves quite intoxicated. Drunk. Pei Zhen had a few glasses, and his face was flushed, his peach blossom eyes heavy. At a glance, he was irresistibly charming. Pei Zhen, I've not seen a person more suitable to be an actor than you, said the drunk director, who was speaking quite frivolously. I believe you'll surely get the Best Actor award. Pei Zhen acknowledged the comment in a distracted manner. He glanced at his mobile now and then. Pei Xin had a proud disposition and spoke arrogantly, of course, being such an accomplished actor. Everyone was taken aback by the response and immediately laughed. Indeed, the Pei Xin we know, and only you'd have that level of self-confidence. That's what he himself says, and it'd also be Pei Xin alone who dares to be confrontational with the reporters. Previously there was a reporter who mistook a young actor for Pei Xin, and what did Pei Xin say to the reporter? Are you blind, or are you having a brain? Everyone was waiting for the word of fart, but Pei Xin suddenly jumped when his mobile on the table vibrated. As expected, it was Fu Siken. I'm at the hotel entrance. Pei Xin immediately got up, his sudden movement inadvertently causing the table behind to sway and topple over with a crash, waking up a few drunk people. Everyone looked at Pei Xin in surprise, and saw a gentle smile spread across his face. Sorry, I need the bathroom. Saying that and ignoring the reaction of the crowd, Pei Xin swept out of the room like a gust of wind. The door opened and shut, Pei Xin had disappeared. The director hesitated for a while and pulled Xiao Nian aside to speak privately. Mr. Xiao, is Pei Xin in love? He then revealed that a friend's daughter had wanted to know Pei Xin's availability status. Xiao Nian was rather drunk and blurry-eyed. No, Pei Pei is like me, a swinging bachelor. The director was suitably pleased to hear that. But what Xiao Nian, the straightest man in the universe, didn't realize was that his daddy Pei had secretly been seeing somebody and was as bent as a mosquito coil. As Pei Xin reached the back entrance of the hotel, he was suddenly grabbed and pulled into the murky darkness. Following that, an intense kiss pressed against his lips. That familiar breath. The moment their lips met, they started to lose control. How strange. Was heterosexual love just as murky? Stop. Stop kissing. Pei Xin felt the blood rushing to his face, and his body was giving way. His voice was hoarse like his throat was on fire. It aroused Fu Siken even more. Fu Siken encircled his arms around Pei Xin and drew him close, laughing as he teased, just one more kiss. No, more kissing and things will get out of control. Pei Xin hadn't even figured out exactly how things between two men worked. I don't want it to be painful for you. Fu Siken froze at the mention of that. Chapter 164, Going Home, Part 3, From Li Yixiao's Distress, plus 888. From Nia Ting's Distress, plus 77. From Shi Xuejin's Distress, plus 9. From Zhong Yutong's Distress. From. Within the massive distress points, the three heavenly kings were the most noticeable. This must have been due to losing the relic, but the amount Nia Ting and Shi Xuejin had contributed was much lesser than Li Yixiao. Lu Shu wasn't sure the reason why. Could it be a difference in their cultivation? Or were the two of them not as concerned about the relic? Honestly, as Lu Shu looked at the record of the distress points Li Yixiao had contributed, and turning back to look at the depressed look of Li Yixiao atop the mountain, he felt a sense of happiness. At this point in time, the distress points Lu Shu had amassed had broken through 80k. The distance from lighting up the sixth star was only 80k more. During this trip to the remains, distress points were one of his greatest harvests. Lu Shu didn't expect this. Lu Shu wanted to get home quickly. Besides to investigate the powers of the Seal of Lands, the most important thing was to see Lu Xiaoyu. Thinking till this point, Lu Shu hugged the green fruits he had picked inside the remains. Although the spears were taken away, the fruits and the little squirrel weren't. Lu Shu found this surprising. After the Heavenly Network had announced that the Luocheng students could make their own way back home, and that arrangements were made for the other students, Lu Shu immediately made his way down the mountain. Jiang Shuyi followed behind Lu Shu. Did you meet with any danger down there? Lu Shu waved his hand. Nope, I was just following behind everyone else and minding my own business. Anything else we can talk during class next week? It should be Wednesday today, and the Daoyuan teachers had notified everyone that they could rest till next Monday before reporting back for Daoyuan class. The students needed to rest after this huge battle, and the Heavenly Network would have to start dealing with the complaints from parents. With regards to the Daoyuan class future, no one could be sure. Outside the cordoned-off area, all the parents would ask the students coming out, "Have you seen my child? He's from so-and-so city's Daoyuan class, named so-and-so." All the parents had a look of anxiousness, and Lu Shu had been questioned a few dozen times on his way down the mountain, and his reply was always, "I don't know such a person." The sight of these parents made Lu Shu feel pity for them. But whether they received good or bad news, he would never know. Actually, Lu Shu really liked the freedom of having no restraints. The other Daoyuan students would probably have to face naggings from their parents, and might not even have the choice of whether or not they could continue taking the Daoyuan class. Based on Lu Shu's previous conjecture, many parents would want a withdrawal. To them, although they had hopes for their child to be successful, the expense of risking their children's lives would lead to them choosing for their children to lead a normal life. Only when something had happened did the parents understand that the road of training wasn't an easy one. Although Lu Shu liked his freedom, the sight of all these parents looking forward to their children's return made him slightly emotional. Who knew where his parents had gone? While Lu Shu was feeling a bit depressed, he had reached the waist of the mountain and he suddenly saw Lu Xiaoyu sitting atop a tree branch shaking her little legs. Lu Xiaoyu's first reaction at seeing Lu Shu was to jump off the tree branch and ran to him, pinching and pulling to see if he was hurt. But she found no injuries and was finally at ease. But before Lu Shu could say anything to her, Lu Xiaoyu suddenly turned back to pick up the empty snack wrappers and headed down the mountain. Lu Shu was amused. Is she still angry with me for telling her that I'd be gone for 2 to 3 days, but in the end was gone for a week? Leaving her alone at home where she couldn't eat or sleep well. Lu Shu suddenly wondered how long Lu Xiaoyu had been waiting atop that tree branch. Seeing the huge pile of wrappers on the floor, that amount must have been eaten over 1 to 2 days. The tree that she sat on was the tallest one in the area, probably so that she could see the furthest and to spot himself as soon as possible. Thinking about this gave Lu Shu a warm and fuzzy feeling. Although his parents weren't around, there was still someone waiting for him back home. Lu Shu ran to Lu Xiaoyu's side and walked beside her, but Lu Xiaoyu didn't even look at him. And Lu Shu was still constantly receiving distress points from her. While they were walking, Lu Xiaoyu suddenly extended her small hand. Lu Shu smiled and immediately held her hand. Lu Xiaoyu's distress points finally stopped. "Xiaoyu, I've harvested a lot from this remains. Look at the gold chains and watches I have. I reckon we can sell them to a pawn shop and our account will be rich." "Oh. I've had many unusual encounters in this remains. I've seen many ghosts, but I could deal with them. It's similar to how I destroyed your conjured pig that last time," Lu Shu spoke softly. "Oh." From Lu Xiaoyu's distress, plus 199. "Let's go eat something nice tomorrow. How about duck blood vermicelli soup?" "Sure." Your reply to this was quite fast. The two orphans walked through the crowd of parents in the mountains, which was a rather eye-catching scene. It looked like they were a separate entity from the rest of the world and didn't need the inclusion of anyone else. In their own world, only the two of them was enough. Lu Xiaoyu suddenly asked softly, "Was it dangerous inside the remains?" It was still okay, nothing too dangerous. But many Daoyuan students performed very poorly inside. They didn't even have the courage to face skeletons that were weaker than them. Lu Shu thought and said, "It really wasn't as dangerous as I thought." "Oh," Lu Xiaoyu nodded, "are you hungry?" Lu Shu was stunned, "No." Before he could say anything else, Lu Xiaoyu said coldly, "Say that you're hungry." Lu Shu smiled, "Yes, I'm hungry." "Okay," Lu Xiaoyu nodded, "when we get home I'll cook for you. I've already prepared the ingredients. Let's go back home." At this moment, the feeling of depression which Lu Shu felt from the parents' anxious expressions had been lifted. So this is the feeling of family. Lu Xiaoyu had slowly matured and would even volunteer to cook for him. Lu Shu smiled. All right, let's go home and eat. Chapter 165, Checking Harvests, Part 4. The stars along the night skyline were like seashells on the beach, deeply mesmerizing. Under the moonlight, the night is Luo Chang was especially clear today. Lu Shu and Lu Xiaoyu were each holding a bowl of braised beef instant noodles sitting atop the roof. Lu Shu was lost for words but finally couldn't tolerate anymore. So this is what you meant by cooking for me? Unimpressed, he held up the bowl of instant noodles in his hands. Lu Xiaoyu spoke in a serious tone. I wanted to make you something to eat but didn't know when you'd be back. If I bought something else, what if it turned bad? Lu Shu was stunned. This reason seemed logical as Lu Xiaoyu slurped a mouthful of instant noodles and with a face of satisfaction, continued, dumplings for farewell and noodles for welcome, we should eat noodles after coming home from a long trip. But they never said it's instant noodle, Lu Shu complained. Lu Xiaoyu frowned after hearing that. So are you eating or not? Eating. At this moment, Li Xianyi was silently looking at this sibling from the yard next door. He knew that after Lu Shu entered the remains, Lu Xiaoyu's temper had worsened. In order to pacify Lu Xiaoyu, he even bought her a lot of snacks. But Li Xianyi also found out that the snacks-loving Lu Xiaoyu had stopped eating snacks in the day. Li Xianyi was curious why Lu Xiaoyu wasn't eating the snacks and she said that she was saving it for the night. During the period of time Lu Shu was inside the remains, Lu Xiaoyu would go out every night. Li Xianyi was concerned for her safety and secretly followed her once, only to find out that Lu Xiaoyu would clumsily climb up a huge tree at the foot of the mountain and eat her snacks while waiting for Lu Shu. She would feel sleepy at times but still wouldn't go home and would instead lean against the tree trunk and sleep, as if she was afraid to miss anything. And during that one time, Lu Xiaoyu didn't bring many snacks and would keep her little hands inside her sleeves and stare pitifully at the peak of the mountain. Li Xianyi felt emotional at the sight of that, thinking that this was probably the purest form of family love on earth. He didn't concern himself with this anymore and would supply Lu Xiaoyu with snacks every morning for her to eat at night. Li Xianyi observed for a moment before heading back in. He suddenly realized that Lu Shu must have gained a lot from the remains, and this was referring to his vitality aspect. Lu Shu's temperament had changed and Li Xianyi felt that before long, with one or two more opportunities, Lu Shu's vitality training would have a breakthrough. Under the moonlight, the old man suddenly noticed the gold chains and watches Lu Shu was wearing. Just what did this punk do inside the remains? At this moment, Lu Shu saw with his peripherals that the old man had entered his house and spoke softly. I'd tell you in details what happened in the remains after we go back in. There's also something I want to test out. What he wanted to test was his newly obtained 2 soul pearls, one black and the other ambolite. What could be their use? When he first obtained them he had an idea that these were something for Lu Xiaoyu's conjured soul puppets to eat. Whether or not that was true, he had to test it out. Summarizing all his harvests from this remains, the greatest one was, of course, the mountain river seal. Although its uses were still unknown, it must have some extraordinary powers given that it's the relic of a special remain. And the power of a storage space meant that bringing items was now more convenient. If a future opportunity for him to follow Li Xiao into another remain presented itself, he could secretly hide items inside the seal. It's basically a household traveling magical kit. The second greatest gains were the gold chains and watches. Money, to Lu Shu, was happiness itself. During the earlier exchanges, he was secretly calculating and estimated that these items were bought for about 190k. Not every item was worth a lot, but if he could sell everything at half price, his income would be 90k plus. Even a lower price of about 30-40k was acceptable. He could only confirm this at the pawn shop. He wondered if his Daoyuan student identity would play a part during his visit to the pawn shop. It would be a waste to not use such a powerful identity and Lu Shu wanted to make the most out of it. The third greatest gain was the distress points. It was a large harvest that could already supply half the amount needed for the 6th star. The fourth greatest gain was the 12 long spears within the mountain river seal. This directly increased Lu Shu's combat power. Although the corpse dog was useful, sword manipulation was a skill he unlocked prematurely. Although he could use the corpse dog, his celestial energy was only enough to use it 3 times. What if he had to face more than 3 enemies? Wouldn't it be awkward? But the 12 long spears could only be considered supplementary. Combat power definitely required a lot more preparation. After the 2 of them went back in, Lu Shu first retrieved the long spear from the seal to show Lu Xiaoyu. But Lu Xiaoyu wasn't interested in this kind of weapon at all. That's true, the long spear was a great mismatch with Lu Xiaoyu in terms of height. Previously, when Lu Shu was watching Journey to the West, he was thinking that Neza and the Red Boy had a really small physique, and just what kind of weapons did they use? Pocket edition ones? Wouldn't that be laughingstock? The Fuli orphanage teachers were stunned at Lu Shu's question and never got around to answering it. Lu Shu told Lu Xiaoyu to summon that Class D soul puppet as he retrieved that black soul pearl from his celestial map, and gave it to Lu Xiaoyu. Let it eat this and see what happens. After eating the soul pearl, there was an immediate reaction. Lu Shu could feel the aura of the Class D soul puppet rising, and it had risen to the level of a mid-tier Class D within a few minutes. That was the same level as Lu Shu. This was surprising. Turned out that the soul pearl made from thousands of ghosts had such a great effect. Lu Shu slightly regretted that he should have stayed in the battle zone longer. If he had gotten one more of this pearl, wouldn't the Class D soul puppet rise to a top-tier Class D? But another reaction happened. This black soul puppet suddenly started laughing by himself uncontrollably. It was such a strange situation. Lu Shu and Lu Xiaoyu looked in dismay at this Class D soul puppet laughing to himself foolishly. Lu Shu suddenly wondered if this could be due to the corpse dog. Lu Xiaoyu expressionlessly turned to Lu Shu. The previous time you caused my pig to explode, and this time my puppet is laughing uncontrollably and can't be stopped. So, the thing you just gave him was a laughing pill? From Lu Xiaoyu's distress, plus 777.
What does it mean to be happy? 'Cause it looks like we all don't know. Glass half full or empty. Man, we just putting on a show. Try to look to the heavens.